Thank you. I'm really excited to talk about this project today. It's really great to, spread the word about this invasive species of grass and the progress that has been made in controlling it, and also get feedback from others. So Slender false brome, or Brachypodium sylvaticum, is a relatively new invasive bunch grass in New York State and the Western New York PRISM region. So it's an important species to focus efforts on since it's only present in a few areas of the region. And if left untreated, it will have some very negative consequences. And so the species forms dense monocultures that crowd out native species. As you can see in this picture, you're looking at it and you can only see the species of grass and no other understory species growing there. So each of those clumps is one plant, and those produce hundreds of seeds each year. And so the species is spread by seed, and they get stuck on wildlife, humans, recreational equipment, and then spread to new locations. And during our survey efforts, we have seen, many times little wildlife trails, deer trails that are just lined with Brachypodium. And so also it grows in a broad range of habitat types. So it's found in pristine locations, disturbed areas, full sun, full shade, dry to wet soils, just doesn't grow in water, and then forests, grasslands. And it's not eaten by wildlife or livestock. So once it gets to an area and starts growing, there really isn't much to prevent it from forming these monocultures. And so the species is native to Eurasia and North Africa. And so it was first found in North America in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. And then it popped up in New York. So it was first reported here in 2009 in Virgin Swamp, which is in Genesee County, and then a location in Tompkins County. And then it was found in Syracuse in the lower Hudson region, and more areas found around Ithaca. And so people started to get together and discuss this issue and try to figure out what can be done about this species. And so Western New York PRISM applied for and received a grant from the EPA through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to create the Great Lakes Slender False Brome Working Group, which is a collaborative that's focused on just spreading awareness of the species, getting people to learn how to identify it, how to report it, and then determining what works to control the species. And so we have a few core functions that we use to kind of drive the efforts. And so we have partner network coordination and communication. So we do working group meetings, and it's actually been really exciting. We've expanded across the Great Lakes Basin, and now we have people that call in from Michigan and Ontario in areas that have Brachypodium. And so this is nice. We can see what other people are doing as far as management, share resources. And then we also do education and outreach. We held a nice workshop that got people out into the field to identify the species, management, which is what I'm going to discuss and talk about our research, and then survey and monitoring. So we have technicians out all summer long looking for the species, collecting occurrence data. And we also have a GIS technician that created some habitat suitability maps for us, and we'll be back this summer to update the models, and those are used to guide these survey efforts. And then we installed some boot brush stations near the infestations in Western New York to get the information out there and hopefully encourage people to clean off their hiking equipment and their footwear. And so for management, so Brachypodium is an early detection species in the Western New York region, and so it's only found in a few locations, and eradication is still the goal. And also some unpublished data from management efforts in Oregon has showed that the seeds are only really viable in the soil for 2 to 3 years. And so essentially a full forest removal effort over a couple of years can deplete the seed bank. And so in the Pacific Northwest, there was a great deal of time and effort devoted to management of the species. And so we use those as a guide for our own methods, but we have a different climate, different environmental variables. And so the methods that were successful in that region may not work as well here. And so a main part of this project is researching the effectiveness of different removal methods to determine the best management practices and then be able to make management recommendations if this species pops up in new areas for private landowners, land managers. So to do this, we use 3 large infestations in the Western New York PRISM region. And so one is at Letchworth State Park. And this is a 42-acre Brachypodium infestation. So it's spread out over a large area, but the plants are actually very scattered and kind of smaller in the area, which is good. It's also in the shade, and so maybe a combination of the species not getting full sun, or maybe it also hasn't been there as long. So it's a very patchy infestation. And then the second area we're looking at is Genesee County Park and Forest. And so this area is a very dense infestation. So as you can see, whereas in Letchworth, only a few plants were present in the plot and they didn't cover the entire area. Genesee County Park and Forest, there are some very large plants. They're doing well there. And so this infestation is very dense, and there are a few other understory species present. And then the third area is Burgeon Swamp. And so in this area, there's actually a research team from the college at Brockport implementing removal studies. And so we were able to go in and set up some plots in the area to collect data. And so this area has multiple dense infestations, and then the plants are also present along the trails, and they're even found out in the remote off-trail locations. And so the removal methods that we were looking at are manual removal. And so this one is just digging up entire plants and roots. And so for this species, there are some pretty big clumps. And so while the roots aren't, they're pretty shallow, we still have some large root masses to dig up. And then they're just contained in landfill-bound trash bags. And then we're looking at mechanical, so cutting all of the plants twice during the season using mowers, string trimmers, things like that, to prevent seed formation. And then we have herbicide-only areas, which are treated with Accord, which is glyphosate. And so studies in Oregon showed that this was more effective than some of the grass-specific herbicides that they worked with. And so that's why we chose this particular herbicide for treatment. And then mechanical herbicide, and so it's a combination of both of them. So it's the plants are being cut twice during the season and then have an herbicide application towards the end of the summer. And so for Letchworth State Park and Genesee County Park and Forest, we went in and did all of the surveying, the removal from start to finish. And so the infestations were divided up into different management units, and so each section would receive one of the 4 treatment methods. And we tried to make the units as easily identifiable as possible and use trails as the boundaries, just because we had a lot of different people out there working, and we didn't want it to be confusing to send different people out to do the removal. And so we tried to keep the mechanical, herbicide, and herbicide areas pretty similar in size, but the manual section was much smaller. So typically when you have a really dense infestation, you wouldn't choose manual removal as the primary way to treat it. And so we wanted to test this method, but we also didn't want to cause too much, or it'd be too much detrimental to the soil, and it's also very time consuming. And so we did leave a small section for manual removal, but it is not the same size as the other management units. And we also left a small untreated area to act as a control. And so I understand, this is always tough to do with invasive species management because you want to get out there and remove all of the species and get rid of them from the area, but we think the control will be helpful so we can rule out any sort of environmental factors and see that the removal efforts were the true cause of the changes over time and not some other environmental factors. And then we used quarter-meter squared quadrats for plot establishment and data collection. And so this size is frequently used for sampling with grasses, and it was a good fit for our research needs. And so we generated a random list of coordinates for each of the management units so that we would have 5 plots set up in all of the management units and the control areas. And so at Genesee County Park and Forest, this was nice and easy. You would put the coordinates into your GPS, get to the area, and put the plot down, and there would be a ton of brachypodium in the spot. For Letchworth, it was a little bit more challenging. We had to kind of go through a few areas since the infestation is very patchy, but for our research, we need brachypodium to be present in all of the plots. And then as I mentioned earlier, Burgeon Swamp was just a little bit different since there's already a group doing research there. And so the removal methods and management units were determined by the researchers there. And so as part of their work, they did the mechanical herbicide in the big infestations, and then mechanical along the trails, and then manual removal in some of the areas that had the rare plants or the sensitive areas. So they did not have an herbicide-only area, so that method will only compare between 2 of the sites, and then they did not have a control area in Virgin Swamp, so we used a park that was nearby to set up some control plots. And so, as I said, our main goal was data collection and management, and so we did not want to interfere with the research that was in the area. And so what we looked at, so we went out before any treatment was done and collected data. So we looked at percent cover of brachypodium in the plot and the number of plants. And then we also listed all of their species present, categorized them as native, non-native, or unidentified seedling, and then estimated a percent cover for those 3 categories as well. And so something that we did not look at last year was percent overstory cover over each plot. That's something we're adding in this year. So when the areas were initially assessed before we decided to use them as treatment areas, we had a general overstory cover for the whole area, but this year it might be more interesting to see percent cover over each of the plots, and that can explain possibly why the plants are so much smaller and more scattered at Letchworth versus the other areas. And then we also wanted a metric to look at effectiveness sort of immediately after treatment. So right after treatment was carried out last year at the end of the summer, we went out and counted the number of brachypodium plants producing seed in each plot and then the number of seeds per plant. And so again, this gives preliminary data, but sort of we'll have a better idea when we go out this year and revisit the plots to see what grew back. And so this species typically produces flowers beginning in July and has mature seed by the end of August. But last year we saw flowers pretty early, starting on June 21st, and the researchers at Virgin Swamp also saw mature seed by mid-July. So we really wanted to have these removal efforts in place before the end of June to prevent any plants from going to seed early if the conditions were right. So the manual removal began immediately after data collection. Since this is so time consuming, we wanted to make sure that we got out there right away and started digging up the plants so we didn't have to be in there when there was any seed and risk spreading it around. And then the herbicide only treatment was also carried out in late June. And so the mechanical herbicide areas were cut twice during the season. So we chose the last week of June to prevent sort of those flowers were forming and to really cut them back. And then also again at the end of July in case any of the plants started to grow back again. And then the mechanical herbicide area received treatment in mid-August, which was 3 to 4 weeks after the second round of cutting. And so all of the herbicide application was carried out by the Western Yard PRISM crew. And thankfully for us, the cutting was carried out by our partners. So the New York State Parks Strike Team and the grounds crew at Letchworth and the staff at Genesee County Park and Forest went out and cut these areas for us, which was incredibly helpful for this project. And so what did we see? So one thing we noticed about the infestations, like I mentioned earlier, was that Letchworth and Genesee County Park and Forest were pretty different. And so on average, they had the same number of plants each of the plots, but Genesee County Park and Forest had a much higher percent cover. So the plants there are much larger, they're doing really well, and so likely producing more seed. And then at Virgin Swamp, we saw almost double the number of plants per plot. And so in this case, this is actually a good thing. So that means that they're smaller plants. And so a couple of years ago, the treatment in Virgin Swamp began. So some of these areas were cut before we went out to collect our data. So hopefully this shows that if this area had been cut before, the plants are coming back smaller, and hopefully over time that cutting can prevent some of the plants from coming back. And then, so we did have some preliminary data for the seed production. So as I mentioned, at Virgin Swamp, we had to have our control area at Drew's Nature Center, which is a nearby park. And so in this area, the plants in the control area that didn't have any treatment produced, 300 seeds per plant, over 1,000 seeds per plot. And then when we went and collected data in Virgin Swamp, so there we had 5 manual, 5 mechanical, and 5 mechanical herbicide plots. And out of those 15 plots, only 2 mechanical herbicide plots had any plants that were producing seed, and 1 plant had 8 seeds and 1 had 39 seeds. So that's really a dramatic reduction from the control area. And then again, at Genesee County Park and Forest, the plants had hundreds of seeds on them, 1,000 of seeds in each of these quarter-meter squared plots. and we went out and visited our experimental plots, and none of the plants in those plots were producing seed. So again, a drastic reduction because of our removal efforts. And then, like I said, Letchworth State Park is a little bit different than the other ones. So out of the 5 control plots, only 2 of them had plants that were producing seed. Each only had 1 plant. So one plot had 1 plant that had 15 seeds, and one had 20 seeds on it. So again, the infestation isn't as dense there, but I think it still provides good information for us. And then when we went back out to the experimental plots there as well, we didn't see any plants that were producing seed. And so since the infestations we were treating are so different, it will be interesting to see if the same methods are effective across 3 areas. And so hopefully we'll be able to make some recommendations when new infestations pop up, whether they're large or small or dense or sparse, so we can really give some good informed management practices. And so then I just wanted to share some pictures of the management efforts because it's a little more exciting to look at. So for this one, I have the control area that didn't receive any treatment, and then the mechanical area that was cut twice during the summer. And so it really did make a big difference. The plants are a lot smaller in the area. And so while the mechanical treatment is not really a standalone method, so eventually someone will have to go back in and do some manual removal or some herbicide treatment, but it is really nice if this infestation pops up somewhere and the people don't have the time or the resources to maybe hire a contractor to do herbicide application. So it's really effective even just going out if you have someone to cut the area and preventing it from producing seed and adding to the seed bank. And then the herbicide area, again, this is at least preliminary, what we saw was really effective, but you are left with a lot of the dead plant material in the area. And then for the manual removal, this one we tried to be really careful just to go in, dig up those specific plants and not affect the surrounding vegetation or do too much harm to the soil. And then the mechanical herbicide treatment, so again, I have the control area up there that didn't receive treatment, and then the area that was cut twice during the summer and received herbicide application. And so kind of going into it, we thought this would probably be the best treatment option. So as you can see, since the plants were cut multiple times during the summer, you don't have as much of that dead plant material in the area. And so while our initial treatment did look very successful, we're going to head out into the field in late May, early June to collect the first round of post-treatment data. So this will really show us how well the removal worked. And so we're looking to start removal a little earlier this year. We just want to ensure everything is complete before seed set. I'm definitely a little concerned about the manual removal. So last year, we went out, we had these really big clumps to look for and to dig up. And so this year, we probably will have a lot more little tiny seedlings. And so we'll have to really, comb through the area to make sure that we get everything. And so then we plan to analyze the changes in the plots and determine the effectiveness of the treatments. And we'll use the results to create a best management practices document that will be available for others to use. And then we're also hoping to work with the partners to gain assistance with some long-term monitoring at the sites. And the West New York PRISM crew does also have time set aside in their schedule each year for early detection monitoring as well. And so with that, I just wanted to thank everyone involved in the project and their removal efforts. And I included my contact information here as well as the project website. And so our project website is located within the West New York PRISM website. And so with that, I can take any questions if people have them.